Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Jazakallah khairan for joining us today. We have our very special guest today who will be talking about the family conflict amidst the pandemic. How can we solve family conflict during this time? We're in COVID-19 and we're all close together, so this is it can be a benefit and sometimes can be also a harm. So I think it's very important we talk about this topic today, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, we have Sister Shadia Marshad with us today. And Sister Shadia, she's experienced in this field. She's a registered social worker in Ontario. Alhamdulillah, she's earned her master's in social work from the University of Toronto in 2012 and has been working with the mental health and addictions field ever since. She works with families, with individuals, and she's well experienced in this field. Before I begin and I ask her to take over, inshallah, I just wish everyone can please fill out the poll at the bottom. So I have a poll just asking where you're from today. And as well, I see many names that are familiar to these webinars we've been doing, alhamdulillah. But in any case, if you have any questions, please do ask at the bottom. So you'll scroll down to the bottom of the platform where it says questions, and you can basically ask your questions in that tab, inshallah. So without further ado, I'll ask Sister Shadia, please go ahead. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. When I was asked to talk about family conflict amidst this pandemic, I was very excited. This is something that I am very passionate about. I know that family conflict, family violence is a huge problem before the pandemic, but with the pandemic, we have seen an escalation. So I think it's very appropriate that and I'm hoping that after this, that we will be able to take away some things and hopefully practice them within our families. So this is what the half an hour or so is going to look like, what is going on right now, and then we'll look at factors contributing to family conflict. And then we're going to talk about this concept of window of tolerance and how we can self-regulate, learn some skills to regulate our emotions, such as soothing, self-soothing activities. We're going to have some grounding activities. We're going to talk a little bit about communication skills. And then I'm going to leave you with a couple of resources just for the people if they do want to reach out further for additional resources. So obviously, these are unprecedented times. It's the unpredictability and the lack of control of what is happening right now that is traumatizing. And obviously, when we're traumatized, we get adversely affected. Our nervous system does not work as it should. And I just a little definition here, what a trauma is. Trauma is a unique individual experience. It could be a one event or a series of events or a set of enduring conditions which a person feels they're unable to integrate their emotional experience and they feel overwhelmed. So we've got this trauma is very different for different people. And it could even be a perceived danger. It doesn't even have to be real. But if a person is seeing that they're going through this overwhelming emotional experience that they're unable to control, they can be traumatized. And some statistics, according to the Minister of Women and Gender Equality, Mariam Monsef, she quotes 20 to 30% increase in rates of gender-based violence and domestic violence in some of the regions in this country. This is within the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of this data is anecdotal at this point because we're still collecting it. It's unprecedented. This has never happened, so it's everything is new. But we are in the process of this data. Is very important data is being collected as we speak. A poll that was done by National Observer that they interviewed a lot of first-hand responders, and the numbers have tripled in women and families seeking emergency help. So this is really alarming. And what is really scary is the cases are reporting more severe and complex issues as we speak. So I just want to just make a disclaimer out there. Safety trumps all else. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their homes. And if this is not the case, you need to reach out for help. Whatever I'm going to talk to you about today is immaterial if safety is a concern. If you're fearful for your life and your safety and your children's safety, you need to reach out for help. It can be talking to your neighbor, talking to a friend, talking to a family member, whatever. Just reach out. This is very critical. Nothing else matters when safety is concerned. We're talking all what we're going to talk about today is about how we can minimize and control conflict, but not when it comes to personal safety. So I just wanted to say that out there. Some of the factors that are contributing to family conflict, obviously the fear, the uncertainty, and the unpredictability. We talked about in the beginning about how we've lost we feel we don't have control. We don't know what's happening. Anxiety, the fear of not knowing, do I have my job? Do I not have my job? We're confined in really small areas. Like now we're having to worry about sharing workspaces for those who are fortunate enough to have work. We're finding that we're having to um, juggle between what's happening. The kids are at home, they need to be attended to. There's a lot happening, and the confinement in small areas can really trigger people to go way out of their norms. So we're going to talk about that in more details. Obviously, the isolation is huge. We've lost our natural supports. Like we don't have our workplaces to go to. We're not talking, we're not seeing family as much. We're not talking to friends that we used to or meet up or all these, we're not going to the masjids as we were. So there's a lot of natural supports that have been lost. And obviously the income and the loss of jobs is a huge one. All this can bring depression. It could be ongoing depression. It could be even situational depression at this point. So these are some of the factors. Obviously, there's more. So I want to bring up this idea of window of tolerance. This was initially coined by Dr. Siegel way back in the late 1990s, when he kind of explained how human emotion comes about. If we understand what happens, it's easier to self-regulate. It's easier to see our partner's deregulation and help them self-regulate. So I want you to really look at this diagram that I have on here. So everybody has a window of tolerance. And within this window of tolerance, we are at our optimal arousal zone. So you look at this window that every one of us has, and that's where we can function the most. Okay, that's where we're able to think and act reasonably productively within that. When we are thrown out of our window of tolerance, and it doesn't matter which side you go, you could be hyper aroused or you could be hypo aroused, and you're on the other side of the spectrum. And then we kind of go back, like our brains have kind of like, and it's all through socialization. We're going to talk more about it in our second slide. We are not at our optimal arousal zone, and it's these moments that we're out of this window of tolerance that conflict happens. So we're looking at, I've got another slide. This is kind of like it's more detailed. um, Either side, hyper aroused, either side is not good. And just to make a note of this optimal arousal zone, when we are under excessive pressure or strain, like we are now with the COVID, this window can actually constrict. It can even become smaller. Ideally, we should be enlarging this window. There's ways we could enlarge the window. The larger our window of tolerance and optimal arousal zone is, the better for us, because we're able to deal with different emotions in a better and more productive way. So it's very important to understand when there's stress, when things are out of the norm, when we have all these other layers, that we will have constricted window of arousals. That means our ability to cope the best we can with what is ahead of us or what is facing us becomes even less. And there's different ways. We're going to talk a little bit about skills, how we can enlarge this window of tolerance. But when your body feels that you are under attack, you kind of there's emotional arousal that happens within your brain, and I'll talk about it more in the next slide, that we kind of get into this fight or flight or freeze kind of response. And obviously, when we have gotten to that stage where we feel we're in these emotional responses, our reasoning, our thinking is thrown out of the window. So we have to be super careful to understand why we act the way we act when we are extremely stressed or we are going under extenuating circumstances like we are in this situation right now. So this second slide will kind of like, I wanted to really go into detail about self-regulation because it's very, very critical to understand how we can self-regulate, and in the sense that we are able to stay within our optimal arousal zone. So self-regulation is the ability to remain calm, to cope with big emotions, adapt, and respond appropriately to our environment. Okay, it's more like I want you to think of it like more like a gas tank. Okay, self-regulation draws on a limited resource pool. So people need to feel good and energized to cope when they're feeling overwhelmed. So it's very critical, it's very important to increase these protective factors to refuel this regulation tank. So resource pool for regulation, and it needs to be replenished regularly, is the three critical things that everybody will tell you is good sleep hygiene. You have to make sure you sleep well, which is not easy in these times of what we're seeing, but sleep is critical. A balanced diet is critical. When there's less money, there's worry about the future, our diets can get affected. And if you're not nourishing yourself, you're more than likely not going to be able to replenish that tank that will be able to put you in that optimal arousal zone that we are aiming to get to. Regular exercise, these are all essential pieces um, that you absolutely have to be. It has to be a part of your daily activity. Come rain, come sun, these are critical. You have to replenish. Think about it. If a car doesn't have gas, it's not going to move. The same thing with a human being. You have to replenish. A lot of people don't know that serotonin, which is the happy hormone, majority of your serotonin is found in your gut. So that's how important your diet is. Like, people think it's all in the brains. It is in the brain, but a lot of it is in your gut as well. So what you put in your body directly dictates how your mood is going to be. So our brains, the other piece I want to make very clear, and I hope that I'm not going to just ramble on, I don't want to be too technical, but I want us to think about our brains as two parts, equally important, but we have two parts. I want to call it the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. The downstairs brain, which includes our brain stem and the limbic system, is what controls our body's basic functions. Let's say the heart, the breathing, the heart rate, the stress responses that I talked about, the fight, flight, and freeze situation that we find ourselves in. So when our downstairs brain senses danger, it moves to act. We don't think. We have a little bit of a small, tiny organ in our brain. It's called the amygdala, and that is kind of like, I want you to think of that as the fire alarm. So that fire alarm will go on, and your body kind of like starts thinking danger, 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 and then you want to act. This is good. When there's a fire, you get this adrenaline pumping, and you want to move away. Or when there's imminent danger, that's what saves us from getting burnt or getting into like a worse situation. What we don't want happening is our brain tricking us to thinking we're in this danger zone constantly. And this is what happens if we allow this downstairs brain to be constantly active. So when an individual is, so when you feel safe and you feel relaxed, then what happens is you can think. You're using your upstairs brain. So the upstairs brain is composed of the prefrontal cortex, and this is responsible for self-awareness, self-control. This is the logic part of our brains. So what is interesting is if that upstairs brain is activated, our downstairs brain gets deactivated. So really the upstairs brain goes online, the downstairs brain goes offline. They never work together like simultaneously. So understanding that the minute you activate your upstairs brain, it's going to deactivate my downstairs brain. And guess what's going to happen to those emotions? I'm activating my upstairs brain now. I'm thinking, I'm using my logic. I have time to kind of think of consequences. And okay, if I do this, it'll be unfair to my wife. Or if I do this, it'll be unfair to my husband. It's not fair for the kids. You're thinking. The minute you put that thought in your brain, you're deactivating your downstairs brain and you're activating your prefrontal cortex, and you have time to think and react in a way that's more productive. So I will be referring upstairs and downstairs brain a lot for the rest of the presentation. So whenever I'm talking about the upstairs brain, it's the logic brain. When I'm talking about the downstairs brain, I'm talking about the emotional brain that just acts without thinking. And the upstairs brain is the one that you kind of think, and you have time to react, and you think of consequences, and you make better choices. So when we feel that we're out of our window of tolerance, when we're out of our window of tolerance, which brain are we using at that point? When we're out of our window of tolerance, we're not thinking, right? So obviously it's the downstairs brain. So we want to constantly make sure we're back into our window of tolerance. This is our window of tolerance. We absolutely need to enlarge it. We need to increase it as much as we can. And we need to understand when we are not, when we are hyper arousal. When we are hyper arousal, we get angry quickly, we react quickly. Sometimes we have maladaptive behaviors. The anger can it can be, you become violent, you become impulsive. These are all hyper. When you're in the fight or flight mode, you become all those things that are maladaptive that we don't want to be. And that's when you become, your brain kind of takes you to some people end up unfortunately getting into situations where they have to use drugs to kind of cope with what's happening because they don't understand. That's hyper aroused. When you're hyper aroused out of your window of tolerance, then you're looking at, you're dissociating, you're doing that, you're, like that silent treatment that we do, we go through with our partners. We become like we act dead. We have this passive aggressive kind of, we're not talking, we're not reacting, we're not responding, and we don't want to know, so kind of thing. So either way is not good. And our main, this is for today, hopefully you'll take away ways of understanding, becoming self-aware of what is happening in your window of tolerance, and B, try to self-regulate yourself, and even try and help your partner self-regulate their emotions. Skills to regulate emotions. Self-awareness, as I said, the minute you observe, you think, you slow yourself down, you awake your upstairs brain. So what happens when your upstairs brain is awakened? Your downstairs brain goes offline. So it means you thinking, you're thinking about the repercussions of your act or your words or however you're acting. You're thinking of, how can I deal with this situation better? Why am I going through this? The minute you have that why, self-awareness, observing your own patterns, then immediately you're able to, you're not acting without thinking. So again, understanding and identifying triggers. An example would be, sometimes you're just going through life on a like an autopilot kind of mode. You don't even know what is triggering. You just see yourself getting really upset. Just pausing and being curious and wondering, why is it that I get mad? Is it when I see my wife lying on the sofa the whole day? Or is it when I come home, the food isn't ready? Or when my husband starts talking to his friends so loudly and kind of ignores me? Or is it when the kids are crying, or there's no food, or the house is dirty? That could be like a trigger for people. So understanding these triggers and identifying the pattern, because first you're triggered, you get this very emotional thought. So you're triggered, you see the house messy, you're triggered, you start thinking, my wife, my husband is messy, doesn't do anything, lazy, da 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 da, all these kind of like emotional pieces that come in. And then what happens? it's a matter of a split of a second before these emotional physiological changes start happening, your heart rate, because you remember at that point now you're out of your window of tolerance, and it's your downstairs brain that's working. So you're thinking, your heart starts going racing, you're sweating, you're up, and then you end up screaming, or you end up like saying meanful, hurtful words to your partner or your kids and all. Remember, children in the house, they are mimicking our behavior. If we don't self-regulate ourselves, what do you think is going to happen to your kids when their emotions, when they're adults? This is the time for children to see their parents. Conflict is normal, it's part and parcel of a relationship, but conflict can be done in a way where it's not like dysfunctional. But when kids see this dysfunctionality in the house, and they see mom and dad are always screaming at each other, my dad's calling my mom names, my mom says this, they mimic. And that's exactly what they're going to take for that's what they're going to end up doing to their own families. So it's going to be triggering their own interrelational skills in the future. And guess what happens to that amygdala? They learn that if there's stress, I'm going to scream, or I'm going to hit, or this is what they're learning. So we have to be super careful. So understanding triggers, it activates our emotion, and then physiological changes happen, and then we react, whether we hit somebody, or whether we scream at somebody, or whether we stomp or kick the door, or whatever it is that happens. So that awareness, it allows prevention, because with the minute you put out awareness, as I mentioned earlier, you're awakening that upstairs brain. That's our goal. We have to awaken our upstairs brain. Taking a minute just before you react, you're taking that minute, you're stopping, you're breathing, you're activating your upstairs brain, and you're somewhat deactivating your downstairs brain. Mindfulness does the same thing. It brings us back, it brings us into the present. There's a lot of literature out there about mindfulness. I really urge you all to go do some research on mindfulness. It is amazing. This skill was originated from the East, and the West now has adopted it, and it's very, very helpful. In a nutshell, mindfulness is just bringing yourself into the present, using your five senses to bring yourself into the present. We want to slow ourselves down so that we can regulate our emotions. It's just slowing ourselves down. The minute you slow yourself down, you can react better, you can think, you can you can you can put another perspective, you can put a plan in place and say, whenever this happens, instead of me reacting like this, I can do that. So again, awareness allows prevention, and prevention is what we want, so that we're not in that hyper aroused mode, and we are within our window of tolerance. Pace breathing. Curiosity is a really good one. It activates the prefrontal cortex. Again, upstairs brain has to be activated, whatever it takes for you to activate your upstairs brain so you can deactivate your downstairs emotional brain. Pace breathing in and out, just slowing yourself down. Paced exercise sometimes, just taking a walk, knowing when is the good time to get out of the room or stop the conversation, or you've texted something or you're emailing something, don't send it. When you're upset, don't send it, because when you're upset, you're what? You're not in your optimal arousal zone. So you're not thinking of consequences. You're angry. You're just emotional. So don't send it. Let it sit in your inbox for a day or two. I can assure you, if you're not going to hit that send button, you're probably not going to send it later on, because you would have calmed down, you would have gone to your optimal arousal zone, and you would have either changed it or not send it altogether. So please think about why these are happening. And again, people are reacting to this pandemic in different ways. You might be a go-getter, you want to do so much work, you want to do cleaning, you want to do this, you want to do that. Your partner might not be in the same situation. Maybe their way of dealing with this pandemic is not to do anything, or to do as little as possible, or different ways. So you have to be aware that, okay, this is me, how I'm dealing with this. Maybe somebody else is not dealing with it the same way. And the minute, again, you're arousing your curiosity, you're arousing your observation, you're kicking in your upstairs brain. The other piece that I had to absolutely just put in today is acceptance. So acceptance is huge, because acceptance is accept, radically accept what you can't change. Like if see, two people, a man and a wife, are partners, are never the same. You're brought up from different backgrounds. You're coming from different places. You think differently. um, you just have some things you can't control. You just accept and even learn. The Japanese have this concept, which I think is amazing. It's called wabi sabi. Learning to love, to really love your partner's shortcomings, literally loving it. If it's like they leave crumbs on the toaster, like it. Instead of it bugging you, just say, yeah, that's just him. Like, he's got so many other good things. I'm going to not look at this, So, and then learning to pick your battles. So, accepting what you can change and then looking, am I able to change this? And if I can change it, going ahead and changing it. And if you can't change it, just accept it and move on. So self-soothing activities, soothing, just like a baby. How do you soothe a baby? You kind of rub their back and you rock them and you sing to them and you want to make them to sleep and let them calm down when they're crying. The same thing, you self-soothe yourself. Meditation or praying, taking wudu is huge, because especially try and learn and get into a habit of taking wudu with cooler water or even cold water, because science has shown that if you splash cold water on your face, it immediately calms you down. That's part of self-soothing. Wrap yourself in a blanket, rocking in a rocking chair, taking a warm shower, bubble bath. And this might not even apply. It's just taking what works for you and trying it. And maybe there's other things that will work for you, and doing them. But basically, you're just trying to calm yourself down. That's why you need that time, so you can think. I'm out of my window of tolerance. What can I do to self-regulate myself and calm down and make myself go within my window of tolerance? Because that's when you can actually talk about conflict resolution. We can talk about communication skills at that point. But when you're outside your window of tolerance, you don't even hear what the other person is saying. Research has shown that when someone's really mad, out of 10 words, you're only hearing two, because you're busy thinking about what's your rebuttal. You're thinking about what you're going to answer them back to hit them and hurt them more. So that is not productive at all. So the main aim here is to bring you both into this window of tolerance, so you can actually resolve your conflict in a more meaningful manner. Some grounding techniques, pressing your toes when you're really upset, feet into the floor. That's really good. You're kind of grounding yourself. Squeeze something. It doesn't matter. You can even just squeeze your hand, just like a fist. You can feel the back and the legs against your chair, kind of like just bringing back this is part of bringing you back into the present. Tapping your feet, focusing on the sounds, observing your surroundings, deep breathing, all these techniques, the soothing, the self-soothing, the grounding, all of them is to bring you back into that window of tolerance, your optimal arousal zone, where you could deal with stuff in a more productive way. So this is the last slide that I will be talking about. And I wanted to mention, I know it's kind of like I zoomed in more into understanding how our brains and how we think, our thought patterns, but I just had to bring these communication skills in there, even if it's just a little bit of it. I just wanted to share this. And this is always done when you are when we are in our optimal arousal zone, which is within the window of tolerance. So I want you to think, accountability is huge. So when you say sorry, own it. Don't say, I'm sorry, but, you know, don't nullify this apology by putting a qualifier. It doesn't work. First, you have to validate your partner. I am sorry. And it ends there. I am truly sorry. Validate how they feel. Because if you're out of line, you have to be accountable. We have to take personal responsibility for us to be able to have good and lasting relationships. Vulnerability is another one. So when you're angry, you feel defensive. This is the norm, right? We talked about this optimal window. When you're angry, you're totally either you're hyper aroused or you're hypo aroused. So what happens then? You're not thinking. You're out of your window of tolerance. So when you the minute you kind of calm down, you communicating what is underneath that anger. So an example would be, when you do that, it makes me feel that I don't matter to you. When I come home and the kids are crying and the place is messy, it makes me feel that I'm not important to you. So the I statement is less defensive. Or when you disappear with your friends for hours and leave me with the kids and come home and expect the food to be ready, and I have all this other work to do, I feel that you don't care. So putting the using the I statements kind of immediately, that vulnerability, you're vulnerable, you're making the other person not be defensive. So this is part of communication skills that we can learn to get in and adopt with our families. Empathy is another one. Before you speak, think. Put yourself in that other person's shoes, and think for a second. And that means you're thinking, you're using your upstairs brain. How is this person going to receive this message? Would I want somebody telling me these words? You know? And the minute you do that, you're absolutely not, you're going to change your words, you're going to change your tone, you're going to change your demeanor. So it's very, very important to have empathy when you're trying to communicate with your partner. Obviously, managing conflict has to be done when you're in your optimal arousal zone. It's a waste of time trying to talk to your partner when both of you are flying up or down. And it's absolutely essential that you are in a good place where you can have a productive conversation. So this is one way that I really try and help my clients. I use it myself as much as I can. It's the set. It's kind of like showing your support, and then you kind of put empathy there, and then you say the truth. So even if it's something that your partner is not going to get, not, for sure your partner is not going to like. So instead of just coming with the truth and just laying it out to them, you kind of say, an example I have here is, I'm willing to help you in any way I can. So you come home and the house is dirty, messy, nothing's been done. So you tell your partner, I'm willing to help you in any way I can. And I understand that you're very busy. You had to do a lot of things with the kids and whatnot. But I would appreciate it if you clean more. See how kind of it's just a softer way of, the truth is said, you said it. So you are assertive, but then in a way that your partner is not feeling that they're being attacked. Because absolutely, when you feel attacked, again, I want to refer to which brain are you going to be at that moment. You're going to be dysregulated. You're going to be using your downstairs brain. Do you think that communication is going to go anywhere? No, it won't. So communication skills, it's very critical that we regulate ourselves, and b, help our partners regulate themselves. It's a team effort. And remember, whatever we're doing, our kids are mimicking, our kids are understanding from, they are learning from us. So we have to be super careful what we're doing in front of our kids, especially now that we're confined in these areas with our kids all the time. So these are some of the resources, as I mentioned earlier. If it is a safety concern, you're not wasting time, you're just dialing 911 if it is a safety concern. If it is a crisis, you want to talk to somebody, this is a 24/7 hour crisis line. We have the coast. I don't know where everybody else is coming from, but I can bet you everywhere you are there would be a crisis line. And then we also have, I included, because I live in Halton. I don't know if it will make any difference for most of you, but we have children and family shelters. If it gets to a point where you absolutely cannot be in the same environment, we have the Nasiha helpline. This is a youth helpline with kids. This is an Islamic helpline that I think is doing an amazing job. Instead of your kids calling kids helpline, they can call the Sia helpline. They'll talk to somebody who's Muslim, who will be able to guide them in the Islamic um, culture and etiquette. And also the Nisa helpline is for women who want to talk, who are fleeing abuse, who just they want to just talk and vent and get some help. And that brings me to the end of my talk. So,
Jazakallah khairan, Sister Shadia. I really appreciate it. It was very
oh,
informative. And Alhamdulillah, I think all of
thank
us, we learned a lot today. But I wanted to ask a few questions, if you allow me, inshallah. And I wanted to
mhm,
actually open the
absolutely
floor for questions as well for our listeners. If you want to ask
right.
questions, please go to the bottom. You'll see a questions tab. Click on that tab, and you can ask your question. First question, sister. I know, alhamdulillah, myself, I do as well counseling with families, and it's kind of difficult, especially when you have two partners that they love each other, and they always forgive a lot of the shortcomings of their partner. But one is the borderline before a person should contact these, because what happens, we get into a relationship, and with the forgiving aspect of that relationship, sometimes there's abuse that's happening, and the partner, because of the situation, they're forgiving and forgiving, and they're not really seeking out that help. So when would be that borderline that, if that point is crossed, then a person should seek help?
Yeah. So, what was the question again? Just say it.
So it
So,
basic
yeah,
so ba-
absolutely.
basically, what would be the borderline of, like, if that line is crossed, if that, is it a physical abuse, is it verbal abuse? At what point does a person go out to reach out to, a coast or a Halton Women's Place or any of these helplines?
So any kind of abuse is not okay. Any kind of abuse, because emotional and verbal abuse can actually, I've heard people tell me that words hurt even more than blows. So the words we use to our partners, we demean them, we belittle them, we make them worthless, and that is not okay. That is absolutely not okay. And seeking help doesn't necessarily mean that you want to end the relationship. I mean, the most productive, most healthy people, the healthiest of people, still seek counseling. Counseling and therapy is for our well being. So absolutely, absolutely, like Coast, like CMHA where I work, these are all free services. We do not need any mental health diagnosis. You don't have to have a mental health diagnosis. Stress, anxiety, fear, all that is a qualifier. You would qualify for a program. But any kind of abuse, having a disagreement doesn't necessarily mean that it gives you the right to abuse your partner. And any kind of abuse, and again, it's work, right? Like if you're willing to reach out, I mean like absolutely, like any kind of abuse. I don't see, obviously physical is more dangerous because it escalates and it can be detrimental for the families. Like we've seen many unfortunate things happening. But any kind of abuse, you should seek out help. Any kind of abuse. And if you can through your imam, that's great. But we also have people that we have these resources that are free. You don't have to pay. And you could and nobody's going to tell you leave your partner. Nobody's going to give you that advice. That's your choice. You could work around getting better, and if your partner is on board, he or she can work out how they can get better if they're invested in this relationship, and you can make things
Yeah,
work.
no, I think
I don't know
that
if I
that that
answered.
put it, because the
Yeah.
thing is, a lot of times, couples, when they're together, I guess, because I've been dealing with some cases as well, and sometimes they don't
Hmm.
recognize that, what's being done is actual abuse, and this is not acceptable, right? So that's something that we have to recognize ourselves, that when do we draw that line, that beyond this line, I'm not going to tolerate this type of abuse. So Jazakallah khair for that. Another question I want to add was, uh, any tips for, when two people are in a conflict, and sometimes couples are arguing, and that this is going to escalate to something that will be a fight or whatever you want to call it, and a severe argument, screaming, this and that. So couples, they know that this is going to lead to that, but then they both of them start to instigate, start to make comments, and they know that the triggers from their wife or husband, that if I say this or I do this, I know he will get mad or she'll get mad. So how can we, before it reaches that situation, let's say if the argument is taking place, how can we, are there any tips where we can kind of like stop, put our brakes on and stop, from going ahead and escalating that argument? So do you have any tips? I know you mentioned some, but specifically in this situation, what would you recommend?
So If it's really volatile, if the relationship is really volatile, I would highly recommend you seeing them separately in the beginning. So if you are talking to the one of the partners by themselves, so you're talking a few sessions with each individually before you bring them back together. The minute escalation starts, you have to immediately step in. The best ideal thing would be de-escalate if it's something that is possible, and point out to the partner that has dysregulated the the situation, um, giving that as an example, and you taking charge. It has to be you taking charge. If they're not allowing you to take charge, then I guess it's time out. Like it's not fair on you, because you can be traumatized vicariously by just watching people screaming at each other. Like the whole idea is, we're not here for a screaming match. If we're not going to be able uh, to to self-regulate ourselves, come to a place where we can actually talk and make it productive, then we're all wasting our times. So putting your brakes and saying, enough, I don't think this is a good time. Maybe we will continue this at you end the meeting. It's not, unless they are ready to listen to each other. Do not interrupt. Maybe another thing too is putting norms before the meeting. If it's very volatile, say, okay, let's agree on norms, group norms right now. No interrupting. Everybody has to get a chance. And if it's not your turn, if somebody is trying to budge in and it's not their turn, you just say, no, your turn will come. Let's wait until we finish. Let her finish, or let him finish. So kind of trying to kind of like moderate it that way. It's not easy. It's a tough place, but it's not productive. There's nothing's gonna come out of that meeting if it's just,
Yeah, no,
you know
for
what I
sure.
mean.
I agree with you.
So
I was actually asking for the couple themselves, like, if a wife knows, for example, like when I'm doing counseling personally myself, I separate the both. I don't
mhm,
counsel couples together, right? I'll have the wife come in first, and then
right,
let her speak, and then the husband, because
right,
there's no point of having them together. As you said, it'll become a screaming competition. You don't want that to happen. But what I was asking for is specifically
exactly.
for like, let's say, a husband or a wife that, if they're getting to that situation at home, where they feel that, like one thing will lead to another and they'll cause a fight, right? So what steps, like, should they go for a walk outside, step outside? What should they do? Some practical steps that will help.
Yes, yes. And those are some of the skills that I walking, taking a walk, going out for 10 minutes, knowing when to, and even the walk needs to be done mindfully, because the other partner shouldn't feel like you're stomping away, because that's going to even re-trigger it even more. So just knowing when to extract yourself the best way, because you understand. And if they can understand this window of tolerance, it makes a lot of sense, because they know, okay, you know what, I'm not going to listen to what he's saying right now, because he's way out of his window of tolerance. You can even just self-talk yourself and say, I'm going to go for a walk 10 minutes, or I'm going to go to the next room, or I'm going to go have a shower, or I'm going, absolutely, like. And even you can just stay there and just kind of like distract your thoughts, and maybe just observe what's in the room and count to like backwards. And there's so many things, just so that you self-regulate yourself, so you're not going to be thrown out, because then if you're thrown
Mm.
out, then you're going to respond without thinking, and then you're going to answer back in a way that's not going to be productive. And I think when people understand where they're at and what's happening and how their partners are, it's easier for them to see, you know what, it's not going to be productive right now. I might as well just, like call my friend, or go out, go see my mom, or whatever, like, extract themselves from that. But it's not easy. It's a process. We need to understand, when we're trying to change it's not, we have to allow ourselves. We will relapse, because we've done it this way so many years of our lives. So we're trying to make these little changes, and obviously it's hard, because your brain is geared, and it's already like the subconscious is already, you already acted it, whether you've learned it from your parents, whether you've seen it in the house, whether you've just picked it up from a friend, whatever.
Mm,
You've
that's
done
true.
it this way. Now you're trying to make a shift. just be compassionate to yourself, and if it does, you go back to your old ways, it's okay. It's just how long you're going to be there, and you pick up yourself and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to use this skill that I've learned
No,
to
Jazakallah khairan for
not
that.
get to this place
I
again.
wanted to actually add something as well, with your permission. I think from the Islamic perspective, you mentioned mindfulness,
Yeah.
right? That was very interesting. You mentioned that, and I think that's something that we all have to work on when it comes to, mindfulness of just being aware, self-awareness, mindfulness of what's happening, and I think Islamically as well, Subhanallah, mindfulness is in the Quran, and Allah Subhanahu wa Taala He talks about, something what we call muraqabatullah, which is recognizing that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is watching us. And I think that that comes from, from the Islamic perspective, that's there as well, is that, when you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you, that will change the way we behave, that will change the way we act, the way we make our decisions. So subhanallah, we have, one of the great scholars of the past. This is actually an article I'm reading off, is from Yaqeen Institute, and it talks about that muraqabah, which is the mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani. He's one of the famous Hanbali scholars of the past, a very famous scholar. He talked about what is this muraqabah, what is this mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says that number one is what? Knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. So knowing who Allah is. Number two, knowledge of the enemy of Allah. So knowing who shaitan is. So we recognize who Allah is, and we recognize who shaitan is. And number three is knowledge of your soul's capacity to suggest evil. So the thing which you mentioned before was, recognizing those triggers, recognizing that if I were to do this, or if there was a situation, what would trigger, you know, a certain behavior, right? So recognizing that point as well. And the number four, the last part you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned was knowledge of deeds to be done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The deeds we're doing, for example, the way we are with our spouse, how we treat our spouse, is it are we treating them nicely because we want to get something out of the relationship, because we want to control them, because we want to do anything that which is negative, or are we doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So when we change our mindset from doing it for some worldly gain to doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that actually will change
Mm-hmm.
the way we behave, and our expectations as well. No doubt we should have expectations as a couple, certain expectations. That's how the relationship it works. Is it's love is a verb, as they say. It's given and it's taken, right? You give love, you sacrifice, you take life as well. But at the same time, once we're
Mm-hmm.
able to recognize that when I'm doing these deeds, I'm doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the expectation level will decrease. Right? And it'll be more of, I did this good deed. I was kind to my spouse. I cooked food for him or her, or I did something good, in the relationship. I took them out for a vacation, whatever the case may be. That will, if we do that for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that will actually, that we won't expect much, and it reminds me of the verse of the Quran, when the believers, when they help out, when they give to the poor and they give sadaqah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that talking with the believers, what they say, he says that ما نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا, that we fed you for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do not want any type of thanks or any type of something in exchange of what we did, right? So just saying that we are doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakallah khair. I don't see any questions. SubhanAllah, our crowd tonight is very quiet. Subhanallah. But if there are any questions, please go ahead and ask the questions. Sister Shadi, if someone were to contact you and they had, let's say, it's something personal that they wanted to discuss, do you have any contact information that they can perhaps reach out to you?
Yeah, I absolutely.
No, it's
They
like
can. You
perhaps
mean my
yeah,
cell
perhaps
phone?
your work
Like
email. Yeah, I think
my
that
email.
would work.
Email is
Inshallah, if you
probably
don't have
the
your
best.
work email, perhaps you can type it into the chat, and then they can, if someone wants to reach out to you, inshallah, later on. Okay, so this is perfect, inshallah.
Yeah,
Jazakallah
that's
khair,
my
inshallah.
email.
So again, this
Yeah, that's my
recording will
email.
be
Yeah.
it will be sent to you, inshallah, all of you, the recording, and please do share it with your family and friends. I think this is a very important topic. It just even the fact that someone you might send this recording to, they might need help right now. You might be in a situation where they need help, and they might be shy uncomfortable to ask. So I think it's very important that we send this. Alhamdulillah, very very informative uh,
Mhm.
webinar we had today. I think this is important that we share this as much as possible, inshallah. Sister Shah, did you want to conclude with anything? Any last comments or words you
Absolutely.
wanted to say?
You know what? It's the stigma around mental health, the stigma around asking for help. Like in our community, we've got this huge burden of we worry about how people are going to perceive us, and then we suffer on our own. That need not be the case. That need not be the case. You know what? Mental health, if you're struggling with mental health for whatever reason, this is from Allah. This is from Allah, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's any other mental health situation. This is from Allah. It's just like if you had diabetes, you go, you go to the hospital, you go to the doctor and get medication, or if you have a heart problem, the same thing. Like there's no shame in this. This is a test from Allah, and if there's any help that you can get, you should get. Talk to somebody. There's a lot of resources out there that are free. You don't have to worry about paying for them. Reach out, please, please reach out. You don't have to suffer on your own. Absolutely. And like what Brother Hassan just mentioned there about the thinking of Allah, I'm just kind of like putting that when you put thought into your thought process and your emotional process, what are you at, what brain part of brain, what part of your brain are you using? Your upstairs brain. You're using your prefrontal cortex, and once that is activated, the emotions will go down. The minute you stop yourself, you're really really like hyper, like you're really hyper aroused at some point, and you're in the middle of the argument. Just breathe in and out, and just say, tell yourself, stop. Just those 20 seconds of you to give yourself 20, maybe not even 10 seconds to respond. The minute you allow yourself that 10 seconds to respond, your response is going to be more productive because you've engaged your your prefrontal cortex. You're thinking now. You're not just reacting, because that's what we do when we're in an argument or any kind of conflict. So please, please think about that. Like constantly, like gauge yourself. Where am I today? What do I need to do to bring myself down? Your aim is to enlarge that window of tolerance as much as you can, and your aim is to stay there and know when you're not in, what you can do to bring yourself in. What activity can you do to bring yourself in? And inshallah, if we are aware, first doing ourselves, and also be aware of what our partners are going through, and giving them that concession and saying, you know what, I get it. She's upset. I get it. He's not doing too well. Kind of like once you put that curiosity, awareness, it kind of just from a 9 out of 10, you're going to be at like a 5 out of 10. Just saying those two words, I get it. You know what? He's not having a good day. I get it. The minute you tell yourself that, you're maybe at a 5 out of 10. It's not like you're not upset, but you're not like so upset, like you can't even think. So that's about, like, that's what I would want you to kind of take away from this session today. And inshallah, it's work. It's hard, uncomfortable work, but we have to do it. We have to do it, because how we react to our partners, and what amazes me is this folks, some folks, they're so good to outside people, and they're so nice and helpful to other people, but when they come back into the homes, they're roaring like lions. Whereas we know that we need to be the best to our own families. So really putting those perceptions, and really working on understanding what it is that I'm like this when I get home. Why? Asking yourself those hard questions will bring awareness, actualization, and inshallah, it will bring you into a better place, understanding why you react like that when you're home, and not when you're with your friends, or when you're at the masjid, or whatever, or at work. You don't react like that at work, even if you're under stress. So why is it that at home? So the why, you're already kicking gear into
Yeah,
that
I just wanted to add
upstairs
one.
brain, and that
This
way
very
you can be
beautiful
more
point you mentioned.
productive.
I think, subhanallah, that
Yep.
it becomes a habit. I think it becomes a habit that people, the way they react to their spouse, it's years building up, and they think that's how they're supposed to be, and that's the impression of them being a husband or wife towards their spouse, right? So getting out of that comfort zone and changing yourself, it's a difficult, uh, difficult task. But at the same time, like the way we focus on our careers and we spend years and we try our best to improve ourselves in that aspect, this also will take time. We can never expect our spouses to have the exact same opinions as us. But it's about working together, right? It's about, we cannot control each other, no doubt, but it's about
Exactly.
working together. That's the point of, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us different. And you'll find, like from my own experience, that you'll find that the husband and wife are always different, different in nature. Even their spouses, their siblings might be more similar to their spouses, but themselves they're different. Allah subhanahu just made it like that, just because for us to work together, right? And when we can do that, we can follow the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as you mentioned, that
Yeah.
be best towards your family. And the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith, the best of you are those who are best towards their family. And the last advice the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave before he passed away was to be kind to your family, be kind to your woman, right? Especially for the men, right? So this is something that we're following the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ,
Mm.
and never be angry. Don't get angry for no reason, right? If you feel like you're getting angry, hold yourself, as you mentioned. Hold control yourself, and that's why when the man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he asked the Prophet, "Ya Rasulullah, give me advice." The Prophet ﷺ said, "La taghdab." He said, "Do not get angry." He said, please give me advice. Same thing. لا تغضب. He said three times, لا تغضب, do not be angry. So inshallah, let's take these words. Very kind of you, Jazakallah khairan, sister, for everything. And again, I encourage all of you to, if you have anything, please reach out to Sister Shadia and ask her any questions, personal questions, and as well, share this webinar with your family and friends, inshallah. We will conclude. جزاك الله خيرا. والعصر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان
Inshallah.
لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم الله خيرا السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته
Wa alaikum salam.